The next vehicle we're going to perform tune-up on today is a 2012 Infinity G37. This vehicle is more modern and it's a little bit different than the previous two. This vehicle has coils on each cylinder. It has two banks of cylinders because it's a V configuration. I'll show you right here. There's three. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3 cylinders. So each one of those has its own separate coil. This vehicle also has replaceable air filters. So we'll look at those. We're not going to replace them today, but we'll take them out and pretend like we'll replace them so you can see what's involved in taking the air filter out and then how to access the coils and spark plugs. So we'll do that next. Now the first step in trying to access the plugs on this vehicle is you have to remove this escutcheon cover here. And you can either use a little wrench like this is a 10 millimeter, or you can use a ratchet and socket configuration like that and it'll work just fine. If you work on cars all the time, like me, you're going to use something like this to get it done faster. And this just lifts right off, just like so. That is the first step in accessing the coils. Now before I start taking electrical connections loose and removing the throttle body, I'm going to disconnect the battery on this vehicle as well. So it's right under this cover here. Just remove the cover. And when you disconnect the battery, you only have to disconnect the negative cable. Like that. And you want to tuck it down so it doesn't accidentally pop up and reconnect with the battery. Next, we'll take loose the intake hose. Okay, so now we're going to remove the air intake boot from the throttle body so that we can clean the throttle body, one, and for two, we'll actually have to remove the throttle body to get to the spark plugs and the coils below it. Here's the intake boot here. You want to remove this little clamp from this auxiliary air hose, and when you do that, you want to make sure you're careful not to crack this little hose connector here. You need to take loose this hose clamp screw and this hose clamp screw. Then you wiggle your hose and use a little pry tool to gently manipulate the connection, because sometimes it's stuck to either the mass airflow meter or the throttle body. It'll be stuck in here. So you use these little pries and maybe a screwdriver to gently manipulate it loose. Sometimes you can use a little bit of WD-40 in there to help loosen it up. Don't get frustrated and force it, you'll break something. So that's what I'm going to do next. Take this little hose clamp loose and just move it down the hose. Squeeze it with a pair of pliers, move it down, and then you want to gently manipulate this hose off of here without breaking anything else. You loosen it up like that. You just take your time. These are things that you don't want to rush, because actually rushing to do these ends up taking more time when you break something. So that's loosened up. Next, I'm going to loosen up these two hose clamp bolts here. So you have a hose clamp here. Loosen up real good. Hose clamp here. And I'm going to start by taking this side loose. That'll probably give me a little bit of freedom. There we go. And then I can probably manipulate this here. Gently. Don't get frustrated. It's much faster to take your time. Just take your time. Pull up on this whole thing now because it's loose. Just gently work it off. Notice I'm not putting any torque on this little elbow here. I'm just moving everything up together and just wiggle it, and it'll come out like so. Nothing broke. Then you can start working on the throttle body in. And here is your boot. This is your intake boot. Just set this aside. Okay, so now we're going to look straight into that throttle so you can see what it looks like. This one happens to be clean because I maintain it regularly. Sorry for not having a dirty one. This is a great opportunity to go ahead and clean your throttle. So we'll use the throttle body cleaner again, just like last time. Okay, and all you do is just go ahead and spray that in there, like so. Like so. And then you're going to get your clean paper towel, just like before. Get that and wipe it out. And actually, there's a little bit of dirt in there. So make sure that doesn't build up. If you don't let it build up, it never becomes a real big, terrible job. And now we have a nice, clean throttle. Next, we'll remove that throttle and we'll show you the coils and the spark plugs. The next step in removing the throttle body is to loosen these 4 mount bolts. There are 5mm hex bolts. You can loosen these all up, like so. And you want to be careful, especially when reinstalling this, not to strip the threads. You want to install by hand because this actually bolts into a plastic portion of this top mount. Good. This one's stuck. And this happens, so this is probably good for you to see. Sometimes it'll be stuck. A little bit tight. And there's 4 all the way around. So we'll see what we have down below. And once they're all loosened up, you can finish taking them out by hand. They're very easy. Once it's cracked loose, you just take these 4 mount bolts out like so. And next we'll be getting down to the coils. Now, when you get the throttle body loose, you don't want to disconnect these hoses. There's little hoses down here that are connected to the coolant lines. They supply a small amount of coolant to the throttle body to circulate in there to warm up the intake air. So if you take these little hoses loose, you're going to make a mess. There's going to be coolant running everywhere. So leave those connected. And as long as they're in good shape, they won't break. And what we're going to do instead of disconnecting them is we're going to use an elastic cord. Some call them a bungee cord. I guess that's a trade name, so we have to say elastic cord to hold the throttle body to the side and out of the way, so that we can perform the tune-up and access the coils below. The coils are down below here. And we will connect this elastic cord to this throttle body once it's loose, so that we don't have to take these hoses loose and make a mess. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll look at that. Magically, I have a cord that just materialized, and we just see it just kind of moves back like so. And there's one. Let's see here. No, you don't even need to take the electrical connector loose. I just find a place on here, connect this elastic cord to it, and then just kind of connect it to the car. So it doesn't have to be real tight, just enough to hold it out of your way. And next we'll look at how to take these coils out to do the tune-up on the spark plugs. Alright, so we got the throttle body loose. And I want to give you a really good close-up look what it looks like before we start. Here are the 3 coils. One's here, and one's here. And they're held on by a single 10mm bolt. So there's this one's a bolt here. Here's a bolt here. And here's the bolt for this last one. And they have a little electrical connector here. So you take the bolt loose, you take the connector loose, then you can pull those coils out, each one, and then you can access the spark plug. So we'll do one now. We'll go ahead and take the connector off of this coil here. We'll take this bolt off. We'll take the coil out and we'll remove the spark plug so that you can see how to get to it. And then gapping and sizing and reinstallation with a little bit of thread anti-seize on the threads is the same as all the others. Okay, so first up we'll take off the electrical connector. Just push down on this one and pull it off. And it goes just like that. Take off that connector and move it out of the way. I'm going to slide it here so that it doesn't get in the way. And then we're going to go ahead and take this 10mm bolt loose. So loosen that up, and then you can take it out by hand, nice and easy. There you go, one bolt. And then you should just be able to wiggle this a little bit and just pull that coil straight out. So there's a coil, and then there's a coil connector. And these are usually separate. It looks like they're, in this, yeah, these are usually separate. But it almost looks like this one is integrated. So sometimes you can buy these separately, and sometimes I guess they come with the coil. I think this is separate though. Pretty sure it is. But no, maybe not. This one doesn't come loose. So here's your coil. Next we'll take out the spark plug. Okay, so this particular car has a especially narrow tube down to the spark plug, and it requires a 14mm deep socket, not your typical size for a spark plug socket. So that's just a heads up if you have this exact vehicle. There are several different types of spark plug sockets, so you need to get the correct one for your car. But this one requires a 14mm. Just take it loose like that. Sounds like it needs some anti-seizing. And because this is like a regular socket, it does not have a rubber tube in it, and it does not have a magnet in it. Once the spark plug is loose, I'm just going to use a telescoping magnet to go down and remove the spark. I'm just going to use this little magnet here. It's pretty strong. And I'm going to go down and just grab the top of that spark plug, see, and pull it out like so. I just want to give you an example of what the tightness should be when you're gapping a spark plug. Here's an example of a new spark plug that we're going to go ahead and gap right quick. And let's take it out of the box. And this was supposed to be 32 thousandths, so I'm going to take it, I don't know if you can see that. 32 thousandths. So this is a feeler gauge, and here's our gap. So we take the feeler gauge and we put it in here, like so, in between the electrode and the ground here. Put it in there, and this is about right. See, now the tightness is just, it just goes in snugly. And that's about what you want to feel. So it just goes in, see how it comes out, about like so. So that will give you a reference for how tight it should be when you're adjusting the electrode for the proper gap. It should just go in kind of tight, but not too tight, about like so. Okay?